All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our roundtable. My name's Carrie Hyde. If you don't know who I am, I have worked in the pet industry for 36 years, both in the veterinary world as well as my own business that I've had for the last 20. I met Scott during a podcast that I did a while back, and I was very intrigued at his passion and desire to try to change some of the problems that exist within the pet world, especially for somebody who hasn't been inundated with it like I have. So we decided to start doing these roundtables as a way to help educate people, as well as also raise money to help with a documentary that we believe will actually reach more people and give us the ability to change some of the laws that our pets are facing right now. And people are facing issues because pets are considered property. So we decided to do these roundtables. We're doing them a couple of times a month. And so I'm going to really quickly introduce you, because I know there's a lot of questions that you want to start asking to our specialists here, our experts in the field. So first, I, of course, need to introduce you to Scott Fine. Scott, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hey, everybody.
So this is Scott.
Thanks for being here.
We would not be here if it wasn't for Scott, and unfortunately we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the fact that Scott lost his dog to veterinary malpractice. So we're all just really blessed that you took such a negative thing and decided to turn it around and make a difference. So this is Scott. So any questions you have regarding any of the questions about Joey's legacy would be directed at Scott. And then next to Scott, we have Jerry Robb. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine. How are you? Thanks for having us here.
Great. Jerry is an author, and he wrote the book. I think they all have it, but it's called Joey's Legacy. We highly recommend that you get this. There's an enormous amount of stories in this book that talk about some of the loss of life that we have people have experienced through veterinary malpractice. So without Jerry, writing this book, getting that information out there, and he's been such a big forefront for us to get this documentary going. He found us the award-winning documentarian. I know. I'm like, wait a second, I can't speak. So Jerry, that is just awesome, the work that you're doing. And so I'm glad you're here. He's making it here to every one of our roundtables to help us kind of go over. He knows all of these stories. So thank you, Jerry, for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And of course, we could not do this without our attorneys and our veterinarians, because we need these attorneys to, speak up, and they know the laws and they know what needs to be changed. So I want to introduce you guys to Kristina Bergsten. How are you? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yep, you got it.
Oh, good.
Thanks.
Good.
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. I personally haven't met you, so I'm always excited to meet the attorneys that are on here, because I know there's not a lot of money in doing this. And so I know it's coming from your heart to say, I see there's a problem and we need to do it. So I just want to thank you for being here, being part of this.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So any questions directed at, I know I'm talking a little fast, but I want to get to the questions. So I'm kind of going a little bit fast here. So, but any questions about anything to do with law, of course, is going to be directed at Kristina, and she's going to help guide us through that. And we're going to go through a little bit of that before we get next. But of course, to my left over here on my shoulder, maybe you're right, my left, is Dr. Haddad, Tara Haddad. And I get to just look at her and touch her and feel her. So Dr. Haddad's a veterinarian. Yes. How are you? That's weird. Now I don't know how to do this. I'm not used to doing it this way. So, but Dr. Haddad is one of my favorite veterinarians. I'm fortunate enough that she is here in Southern California, but she's also an oncologist. So, and she's agreed to, Scott asked me, we needed some more vets. And I said, I know the perfect person, because she's got high integrity, and I know that she'd be a perfect person for us to be able to look at this. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we get a little into this, I always give this quick little brief thing, because there's a lot of questions that come through. And I think that both our attorney and our veterinarian would appreciate me telling you this. They can't just in a quick little question, the veterinarian can't diagnose your dog here today, and an attorney would have to really look at the case before they could tell you exactly. So this isn't something that we want you to take and go, well, they said on that round table X, Y, and Z. These are just quick little, what we kind of think, but certainly no diagnosing going on, or attorney advice that could be held to the high standards, because we're just going to be asking some questions. But before we get really into this, Kristina, can you help everyone who's listening, because we're going to guide the questions a little bit, first explain the difference between malpractice and negligence?
Okay, no, that's a great question. That's a great place to start. So standard negligence is just, I can be negligent, your neighbor can be negligent, your grocer can be negligent. Negligence is just a basic standard of care. There's a minimum standard of care that every human being has to meet when interacting with another human being. And that is basically, more or less, it's just treating somebody else how you want to be treated. That's the non-legal way of putting it. Veterinary malpractice is kind of the next level standard of care, where all veterinarians have to act under a certain level of competence, more or less. And if they deviate from that basic level of competence, then that is veterinary malpractice. So hopefully that answered that question.
It's important because so many people don't really understand those. And so we end up thinking that a veterinarian is negligent or it is veterinary malpractice, when in fact it really isn't. And so I wanted to make sure before we got into too many questions. Did you have something you wanted to say? Oh, I thought she did.
Just listening.
She's just breathing. I'm not used to having people next to me. But thank you. That helps, I think, so that when people are asking us, asking you guys questions, we have a little bit understanding there. So Marcia just wants to know really quickly where you are from.
I'm based out of Colorado. I'm licensed in Pennsylvania and Colorado, but currently right now I'm just practicing in Colorado.
Okay, so that's important as we're bringing on our attorneys, that you have to have a license in the state. Not everybody realizes that. So even though Scott has been so great to gather all of these amazing attorneys, the laws are different in each state. And so attorneys have to definitely be licensed. So if you're reaching out to Scott, we have to make sure that he recommends a veterinarian within that area. So you're licensed in 2 states, Colorado and Pennsylvania?
That's correct.
Okay. But Scott, how many veterinarians do you have on board?
Currently we have
attorneys.
well over 50. We have several in, for example, California. We have 10 attorneys. The hot spots for vet mal in the country are typically California, Texas, and Florida, and those are the states where we have the most attorneys. 10 attorneys in California. We just added our 10th one the other day. Texas, I believe we have 5 or 6. In Florida, we have about the same. As of about 2 years ago, I did a quick kind of a cursory survey, and most of the malpractice, and it kind of makes sense based on population, occurs east of the Mississippi River. Mm-hmm. Obviously, California, Texas are exceptions, but we've never had cases in a lot of the Midwestern states. The New England's another, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania are 3 states in the Northeast where there's a fair amount of cases that, inquiries from pet parents in those states. So there's no contiguous pattern throughout the United States. It's kind of here and there, but naturally the larger states with the larger populations would dictate that there are more allegations from those states.
But do you think it's just based on population?
Well, I think the more pet parents in a state, the more likely, there may be. That's the way it's working out. I can tell you that. California, Texas, and Florida, when when we pre-approve people for membership in Joey's Legacy in our group, one of the questions is, what state do you live in? And you can just run down CA, TX, and FL. They keep popping up. It's just the way it is.
I wonder if, Dr. Haddad, you might know this. Do you think that has anything to do with the vet schools and what they're teaching the veterinarians as they come out of? Because don't you think most veterinarians, when they graduate of school, they kind of stay somewhat?
I don't know. I wouldn't think that it necessarily has to do with that. I think it's more the population. I think, in California, you have a lot of dog strollers and little dogs in little carrying packs, and and in Oklahoma you don't have as many of those. You have the dogs that are out in the yard that are maybe watching livestock or doing the job, and they're not as coddled or
protected, maybe less likely to have a pet owner go further with what's happening.
That would be one explanation for it.
Yeah. It's just, I'm sure population always plays a role, but I was curious as to if we can kind of pinpoint what the problem is. Because there are differences in veterinary schools, right? Across the board, every veterinary school is not the same.
I think what I found in veterinary school is that I think the first 3 years, everybody's really learning basically the same stuff. That fourth year, when you get into your clinics, your fourth year is generally spent in the hospital. Now, this is 25 years ago. I'm getting ready to have my 25-year reunion. So this was a while ago. I don't know if it's changed, but that's at that point, then you're working in the hospital. So you really are seeing what is in your community, where the vet schools are. Now, the vet schools tend to be in the more rural areas of the state, but because they have the specialists, if there are people in that state that are going to seek out the specialists, they'll come to that rural part to have something done. But I know I went to school in Oklahoma. If Oklahoma at the time did not have a lot of cancer patients there were not a lot of people in the community that treated their animals for cancer. So I didn't learn a lot about oncology in vet school. It was when I got out of vet school and did my internship and residency that I was really introduced to that on a much more profound level, and then went on to really focus on it because I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
But in the vet school, your 4 years of vet school, they're packing a lot of stuff in there. And I think generally it's not necessarily the school.
Yeah. Kristina, do you see a huge difference in the laws because you're licensed in 2 states? Is there a big difference between Pennsylvania and Colorado?
In terms of the laws, I would say no. I would say generally speaking, the law, because animals are property. There are some states where animals are starting to get recognition as sentient beings, like in California and New York primarily. But they're still, as far as I can tell, property. They haven't risen to the level of being on the same level as a child or something like that. They're always property. So, generally speaking, the laws are more or less the same, but what we might call animal cruelty here, they might call animal neglect somewhere else, so the terms might be different, but more or less the laws and their goals are essentially the same thing. And I would say too that between Pennsylvania and Colorado, I have not personally experienced a difference in terms of who pursues veterinary malpractice and who doesn't, but I think to Dr. Haddad's point, that I think the culture of the state that you're in says a lot about whether or not you're going to pursue veterinary malpractice. So I practice out of the Denver metro area. I get, that's 99% of my business comes from the Denver metro area. But if I get further out into the more rural areas of Colorado, less and less people are likely to pursue some of these animal related cases, because I do more than just veterinary malpractice, but any level of animal cases. It's less and less likely. And I think that's just a culture, community type thing. So for me, that is the biggest difference that I see, is the culture of where people come from, not so much the difference in the laws.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, that's kind of exactly what Dr. Haddad was saying, is that culturally, that's probably why we're seeing a lot of that, because we're in Orange County, so
Okay.
we're that Orange
We're
County
pet stroller capital
Yeah.
of the world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but hey, if that's what's going to get the laws changed, then that's, I mean, I guess it's more power to, because we do need to change the laws. Have you been seeing changes? How long have you been practicing animal law, or been working with animal law?
That's a good question. About 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
From the time you started 8 years ago looking into animal law, is it even a little bit changing? Are we making any headway?
I mean, the laws themselves, no, but in terms of people's attitudes towards the laws, yes. Now I go into court. When I first started practicing here in Colorado, I mean, judges were like, you're not an attorney. What you're here for isn't a legal problem. Go to mediation, go work it out. And now when I go in there, and I am an attorney. It's just some people just have a bad attitude. But now when I go in there, they're like, okay, you know what you're talking about. Like, I'm going to learn from you because you do this all day long. I don't. There was just less education about animal laws and people's devotion to their pets when I first started versus now, where judges just don't see these cases. But now that I'm one of the few attorneys in Colorado that handles these types of cases, they're starting to see it because there's a demand for it. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but
no, it does. Is the demand going up at all, do you think? I mean, or is it? Yeah. Which is good and bad, right? That's got to be good and bad.
Would you say going up in the last, like, pre-COVID, or in this last year? Are you specifically talking?
Well, I was talking about like from the time I started to now. So over the course of 8 years, I feel like it's, I mean, pre-COVID, I couldn't really tell you. I know and like I said, I do other stuff besides vet malpractice. So, I mean, I was really, really busy with that other stuff. I mean, I get regular calls for veterinary malpractice, and then I tell them, go to Joey's Legacy and get that veterinarian letter, and then we'll talk.
Because you have to. One of the things I've said often at the beginning of this is that I've been on both sides. I say this all the time, and people think I'm crazy to say it, but I was accused of killing a dog one time, and I've been on both sides of it, and I have actually seen people accuse veterinarians of really horrible things that they had no part in at all, and I myself have been accused, which is why I always tell Scott, I think I'm the perfect person to bring this about, because I'm not here to just attack veterinarians. I have friends who are veterinarians that I love. but Tara, Dr. Haddad will probably tell you, I personally have witnessed veterinary malpractice. Now, I was young and I didn't know that's what it was. I now know it's 100% what it was. But I guess that's going to lead me to a question to Dr. Haddad. Have you ever witnessed what you would consider veterinary malpractice?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard thing.
Also, let me just say, full disclosure, I owned a stroller for my Pekingese. So I mean, I talk about coming from both sides. Believe me,
right.
I'm as crazy and pet owner as they come. So
she is.
I carried my little Pekingese in a carry pouch, and I had 6 other dogs while I had my Pekingese. So
Dr. Haddad had a place that I used to call the Island of Misfit Toys, because she would take she wants to adopt a kitty right now that has no eyes. Like, she's not.
Yeah. But that's my, I think one of the things that was just kind of crossing my mind when you were talking about the laws and or the response of this, I wonder about this, because now that COVID has kind of changed things for people, at least I don't know about other states, but I know here people are having to drive up in the parking lot let their dog be taken out on a leash, and hopefully they'll make it in the door of the building without getting loose, and then having everything happen. And I think the communication, one of the things to me, at least in my experience, because the first 15 years of my career was oncology exclusively. And in addition to a lot of emotional ups and downs with everybody involved, I mean, and let me tell you, compassion fatigue is a real thing that everybody gets, whether it's a veterinarian treating an animal or a pet parent taking care of an animal. It's very real, and it's just one of those things that you have a lot going on, and communication is the one thing that I think can make or break the whole relationship. And I've always considered it a partnership between me and my client. We're together, we have a goal for a pet. And if you can't communicate with them, and you can't come to common ground and be on the same page, you really are quite lost. And that's when I think you end up sometimes in a courtroom. And what's happened to our society recently has really made it easy for that communication to be disrupted, and you have to work harder at it.
Yeah.
And I think the pet parents are getting so frustrated, and I think they have a right to be frustrated,
Right.
because they're sitting in a parking lot instead of
No, I
it.
think you're going to see an increase in veterinary malpractice because of that. And yet it's not ending. And we asked the veterinarian we had on last roundtable if there was a law that is mandating veterinarians to do that, because it is across the board. And do you know of a law that's saying that veterinarians have to take these dogs from the car now?
I don't know of the law, and I'm not, and I haven't been in practice since this, so I don't know what is happening. I suspect there are some vets that really like this setup. Yeah. I think they like to just go out, grab the dog, do their thing, and collect their money and send them on their way. And I don't think it's everybody, but I think
it's definitely, that's one of the other reasons why we like to do this roundtable, because it's not just about us finding ways to get the information out there. It's also communicating with each other, both with the attorney and the veterinarian. How do we prevent it from happening? Because that's the first thing that we need to do, is prevention, so we don't have to contact attorneys and get upset and lose our pets' lives. But the COVID thing is definitely making it I'm sorry, I'm with you. I think it needs to end. Like, it is, we already have a barrier in front of us when we're talking about your animal, because they cannot speak. So we already have that barrier. Is the animal sick and he can't tell us what's wrong? Now you just took the only other person that's been in the room with him for the last couple weeks out of the equation and stuck them in the car. So I think we're going to see this enormous amount of veterinary malpractice based on the fact that they're not getting the right information. Has that been your experience? Are you noticing an increase just in the last, I would say in the last 8-9 months?
That's a really good question. And actually, I was thinking while Dr. Haddad was talking that, I tell people all the time that I think as an attorney, I wouldn't have a job if people had good customer service. I mean, I just really feel like that's 75% of the battle. Just admit, so we made a mistake. We are so sorry. What can we do to make this right? And then they would never come to me if that was the first response that they got from the veterinarian if something went wrong. But to answer your question, I mean, yes, I feel like I have gotten more veterinary malpractice calls. I don't know if it's because I redid the SEO on my website or if it's because there's been an increase, because I kind of redid the SEO on my website during COVID. So I really couldn't tell you which it is, but yeah, I mean, I have noticed an increase. And And it wouldn't surprise me, but nobody's come to me and said that no one's ever said to me, it's because I was in the car that I feel like something went wrong. So I don't know if they're just not telling me that part of the story, or I'm not sure, but I agree with you. Communication is key. And if veterinarians could just communicate and take really, really good notes. I know that sometimes, that might sound crazy, like, well, I'm just going to incriminate myself further, but I really don't think so. Because I know in Colorado, it's a requirement. It's in one of the regulations governing veterinarians that you have to take really good notes. You have to sign it, date it. You have to have the name of the veterinarian who is seeing the animal at the time. I mean, Colorado does require it to be really detailed. And I think that that's integral. I know that there are some offices that most don't use handwriting anymore, but every once in a while I get one that's just handwriting and you can't read it. And it's like 2 sentences when the dog had, like cancer, something that you're really like, you really need to have more information than that.
This is why I'm not a veterinarian, because I can't take notes. I can't be a vet because they won't let me, because I can't take notes. But I know just from speaking with Scott and Dr. Haddad, Scott, that was one thing that when you went to court, the veterinarian who was involved in the death of Joey, he falsified his records. Isn't that correct?
About a week after Joey passed, I went back to the vet office and I requested his records, which I received very quickly without any pushback. And everything on those records was exactly accurate. I reviewed the records, they were accurate. So I filed my complaint with the Florida Board of Veterinary Medicine. I sent those records. And at that point, I already had an attorney in Florida. A period of time passed. The attorney called me. He said, "You're never going to believe this. I'm going to send you the copy of what the vet sent to the board when they requested the same records." And those records had me as probably the worst pet parent in the world, unwilling to pay my bills. Just I figured he probably figured, what did he have to lose? It's going to be my word against his. As it turned out, they did find him. They charged him with 3 counts of practice below the standard of care, which ultimately was dismissed at the final hearing because he begged them for the 3rd time in 6 years to let him keep his license, and they agreed. Part of the inherent problem and the major reform that's necessary in the veterinary justice system. And it's a battle that will continue until there is that reform. So yes, Joey's records were scrubbed, altered, and I ended up looking like the worst guy in the world.
Didn't, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I'm sure you will. I don't know why people say that. No, I'm going to let you be totally wrong. But didn't he get fined for not keeping good records? So it was for not keeping good records, not for falsifying his records.
So
right. And I brought that point. Yes, go ahead, doctor.
I was going to just say the records that you got immediately in your hands were different from the records that your attorney received. They could tell that there was a difference.
Oh, they were totally scrubbed. They totally revamped the entire set of records. The records I received were totally accurate, reflected everything that happened during the visit. And then many months later, the copies of what the vet sent had me, was they not paying his bills? And I didn't have a balance there. I went in there with Joey, I paid my bills. There was never a balance. And I tried to get the prosecutor to take notice of that. And her response was, well, we already worked out a plea deal with him, so it's too late to go back. The other point I made to them is that was his 3rd violation in 3rd sustained complaint in 6 years. And he was on probation from the incident 3 years prior to Joey. he was still on probation. And of course, one of the terms of probation is you must not violate the Veterinary Practice Act again while on probation, which he obviously did with Joey because they charged him with 3 counts of practice below the standard of care. So I asked the prosecutor again, are you going to charge him with violation of probation? Same response. We already worked out a plea deal. It's too late. So, but this is not anything new. A lot of pet parents go through this. Most of us do. And it's another serious indication that the veterinary justice system is in major need of reform. There's no attempt to discipline firmly or fairly. And for serial offenders like this guy, there's no progressive discipline. He got the same fine and $1,000 fine and 1 year probation as he got for his first case 6 years prior. So there's no progressive discipline. There's no attempt to deter such misconduct. And that's just the way it is. The vet boards take care of their colleagues. There's no secret about it.
I don't know if it's a big, I don't know exactly what happened. And I don't know, maybe Kristina can speak to this, but if the veterinarian actually changed something about the records so the records you received were changed, or he added to them some notes that said, oh, this guy's terrible and doesn't pay his bill. Was it stuff that was added after?
He at least added to, at a minimum, he added to them. Whether or not he altered the original records, I can't imagine why, because those are actually accurate and didn't reflect, in my opinion, any wrongdoing on his part. The wrongdoing came when he got the letter from the state saying, hey, we received a formal complaint against you. Send us all the records on Joey. And before he sent the records, presumably the same ones that I picked up a week after Joey died, he added all this stuff. He told us, and we all know that lipomas generally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, generally are not removed unless they interfere, or generally benign fatty tumors that are not removed unless they interfere with perhaps the dog's ability to walk or some lifestyle issue, which Joey's lipoma was on the tail. He told us we don't remove these unless it's an issue. In the notes or in the records that he sent, advised owner, for owner, correct?
Yeah.
To remove lipoma, owner refused.
So he's
another attempt to
he's trying to paint a picture that you're the problem.
Of course, absolutely. He's got nothing to lose. He knows he's going down for the 3rd time. He might as well try.
Right. That goes back to communication, right? Because Scott has said to me many times that had this veterinarian been more open and honest about what had happened, you would never even be here. Right. But
mine was a little different. Mine was in a situation where he was doing we just had a case where we had a dental cleaning, where either during the insertion or the removal of the endotracheal tube, that process scraped or nicked the lining of the trachea, resulting in swelling and suffocation. The patient passed. Okay, that was a little different. In my case, Joey's vet just literally refused to do labs because he was so sure he knew what was wrong. So that's where he gave him a shot of convenia, which was contraindicated for what Joey actually had, which was kidney dysfunction. And I was told after the fact, by 3 independent vets, that if he had just done the labs, made the diagnosis, there were lots of renal friendly drugs that Joey could have been given that wouldn't have been nephrotoxic as the contraindicated drug was. So that's a little different than actually, you can see the difference. So that's what happened to Joey. Yeah.
So, I think it's Mari, right? Does that look like Mari? Mari, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I apologize, but she brings up a really good point that I want to talk about because I've actually experienced this. I own a boarding facility and we do daycare and grooming. And so we have to get a license from our county in order to have the license. And Mari brings up something interesting. She talks about getting expired medication from her veterinarian. And then she also kind of brings these two things together where she's saying that veterinarian hospitals are supposed to be inspected, but she has spoken, maybe you can speak on this. I know for me, just as a boarding facility, she says that she heard someone else say that they give them a warning before they do an inspection. I have been warned before they come and do an inspection at my place. What about, I don't know about veterinary hospitals because there are two different people who do the licensing.
And when I worked in a veterinary hospital, I wasn't involved in that
part
at
of it.
all. But I also had a boarding facility where we boarded medically fragile pets. So we were somewhere in between, but we weren't held to the standard of the hospital, but we also got warnings that they were coming.
Yeah, the reason why that is important, and as Mari brings up, is that she's been given expired medication, and that should be in when they're being checked, right? What are they checking? They should be checking that they're not giving out expired medications. They should be checking to make sure that their anesthesia machines are correctly being run. Their autoclaves, do they still use those?
Oh, I would think so. I hope so.
I thought maybe they were. I have been out of veterinary world for a long time. I thought maybe they were called something different now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Something that sterilizes.
That's a sterilization thing. So, and I know that those should be checked, but that's another problem is, it's so intertwined. Have you seen this at all, Kristina, where people are bringing up the fact that the clinics are dirty? I always get a warning before they come and check my facility. Hey, we're going to be there on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I haven't had that particular complaint that, this was dirty and that's what caused the malpractice. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, that at least here in Colorado, they give you a notification, not necessarily like a specific date and time. I'm going to be there on June 3rd at 3:15 in the afternoon. It's like, I'll be there on Tuesday, so you don't know exactly when, but you have enough notice to do something for sure.
Absolutely. You have enough notice to do a lot. For us, it actually was because I had two facilities, one in Newport Beach and one in Tustin. Hers was also in Newport Beach. The Newport Beach, when we signed those, it actually told you in the documents that you would be given at least, I think it was 48 hours notice, and before they would come in and check your facility. And I mean, that's just a horrible thing because abuse, neglect, those things can all be taken care of.
Well, but and the reality is when I bought my facility, I remember telling you about this. It was an operating boarding clinic, and it was disgusting. I mean, it was bad. It was horrible. The conditions that pets were kept in, and I remember calling the animal control, the people who were going to be inspecting me, and I said, I'm checking on this address. Do they have an operating license? And the woman said, yes, they do. And I said, oh my gosh, I am appalled that these people would have a license to care for animals. And I said, who in the world? And I don't know, I may be being a little too sassy, but I said, who in the world gave them that? And she said, I did. And I said, oh. And then I thought, this is a woman who's going to have to be having look at my place. And I said, well, you're going to love me then. But what she explained to me was, we just made sure they had water, they had shelter, they had the bare minimum and so it's one of those things. And I imagine with the hospitals as well, there is a bare minimum. These inspectors go in, do they check everything? Probably not. They probably check enough things to go, okay, we've seen enough things that are correct, so probably everything else is correct, or the majority of things. And if they see enough things that are not correct, then maybe they start to go, you know what, let's write up a little fix-it ticket or whatever. Or
if the owner of the business was rude the last time they talked to them, because we know that happens too, right? We know that, you can schmooze a little bit to get by. Right? You can do those kind of things. And so we're kind of opening up a can of worms here because this goes so much further than the veterinary board, which is a problem. in this situation. I know we have all talked about how when you do end up in front of, you want to go to court and you're saying, look, I think my animal died because of veterinary malpractice. That's going to go in front of a veterinary board, which is a group of veterinarians. And so, that's a problem.
I think the majority of veterinarians, like the majority of police officers.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, everybody, they want to do a good job. And you have these people, other people that for whatever reason are just not as interested in holding themselves to a high standard. But, and as far as the clients go, I feel like if you walk into a place and you're getting a bad feeling, if you see that it's not kept up well, or turn around and go somewhere else, because but in the meantime, I know that it would be nice to get things changed so that this minimum standard, maybe we could bring it up a little bit. There's probably some room there to bring it up and still not be too imposing on people and actually benefit more animals.
Are there any private, I know there's one, and we've talked about it before. It's not exactly where I'm going, but, and maybe I don't know if you've heard of any, Kristina, at all, private organizations. You know how like when you go to a restaurant and there's like the A for
where you grade them?
Yeah, like where they grade them. I feel like
that's the health department.
Right, but I feel like
AHA does that.
We should have, they do?
Yeah, I think AHA does it for hospitals.
Okay.
And it's oh gosh,
the American
Animal Hospital Association. Maybe?
They do, really.
Yeah.
Huh.
Okay.
Because maybe that's our next step, is finding so that you can go and say, look at, because the licensing boards and the people that come, like the animal control that comes and visits me, we're once a year. I mean, literally once a year. And now with COVID, I haven't seen them at all. So I feel sorry for the animals at this point, because I think no one's going to do anything about it. But what do you know about, I know this is kind of, a fairy tale of mine, but do you think it would be possible to pass laws that animal care facilities like veterinarian hospitals and boarding facilities would have to have a camera running at all times while treating animals who can't speak for themselves? Do you think that's a law that could never happen?
So that's a great question. Logistically, I think there's just a lot of problems with that, because one, like you're going to be imposing a cost on veterinarians to self-monitor where does that data get retained, for how long, who does it get sent to? I mean, I know there are some animal care facilities that have security cameras in various parts, whether it's boarding or veterinarian offices. But my experience with security cameras is that footage is only retained for 10 to 14 days at a maximum, and then it gets recycled. So unless you get in there within that 10 to 14 day period to request it and say, like, you have to, I'm sending you a letter of preservation, that's what it's called. You have to save this footage on this date between this and this time. And if you don't do that, then like they have every right to just, oh, it's gone. Yeah, sorry, you didn't get it in time. Our footage is recycled. So, I mean, you have to use, so my concern with that is just like logistically, like, how does that even happen? To me, I think the way to change this issue with veterinary malpractice is to change the laws, and that animals are no longer property. As long as they're property, they're only worth the purchase value of, that's it. They're worth their purchase value, more or less. Obviously, Joey's Legacy is changing that through its attorneys and things like that. And attorneys are recovering more than they have ever before in the past on veterinary malpractice, but it's still, compared to medical malpractice on a human, the recovery is still significantly lower, which is why some attorneys don't take these cases. So I think if you start getting animals treated as more than just property under the law, then if a veterinarian is like, oh, instead of $200 on a purchase value, now I'm responsible for like 10 grand. Then it might be more, because a lot of the issue that I run into with this is that, on their website, oh, your pets are family. We treat your pets like one of our own, they're God's little angels or whatever.
Oh,
You know, I mean, they have this very amazing language, and it's like, oh, great, of course, I would love to take my pet there. But then when something bad happens, it's like, honey, your pet is worth $200. What you gonna do about it? I mean, they're really nasty when they come back. They don't, they know
you're
the law.
so dead on. I see that a lot. I see that so much, where it's the love of your life, but I see it from the pet owners as well, right? They'll come to me and they'll say, this is, the dog they love more than anything, life itself. And then you say, well, you should feed him a better diet. And they're like, well, he's just a dog. I'm like, well, wait a second. Like,
fair.
So I've seen it. We both have seen it on both ends.
Sure.
It's on both sides, but you're right. But I guess one of the questions I would have is there a middle ground, or should we be going straight all the way for it's the same value as my child, or is there a middle ground we should be going for?
I don't think we'll ever achieve that because of agriculture, because once you start to say that about, oh, my dog is like my child, then agriculture jumps in and says, well, no, it's not, because it's the same thing as a cow and a pig, and we eat cows and we eat pigs. I don't, I'm vegan, but most people do. I mean, it's a thing, right? Just wanted to throw that out there. I don't eat my clients. But I mean, like, that's the problem with the animal world, is that, pets and cats and birds and whatever are the same as chickens and cows and pigs as far as the agricultural and the dairy industry are concerned, and they have very powerful lobbies. And like, I'm not saying anything like you want to eat a cow and a pig, whatever, that's your choice. But I mean, that's the reason why our animal laws are the way they are. So I think New York is onto something where they're going towards that middle ground, which is, okay, animals are sentient. They have thoughts and feelings and emotions. Yeah, we can't go in and send the dog to a therapist after a veterinary malpractice incident and ask, like, how traumatized are you? But I think we can assume that based on, the fact that the dog, almost bled to death, we can assume that the dog probably suffered some trauma. And, so therefore you should be able to award based on, the dog's pain and emotional distress from that, but also like the human who had to watch I had a case like this where they had to watch their dog like slowly suffer over a period of days because they didn't know what was wrong. It was bleeding internally. And then finally they went to an emergency vet, and the emergency vet was like, oh yeah, like this whole section of his body wasn't sutured back up. I forget exactly what it was. I think it was a neuter gone wrong or something. But yeah, I think if we can go to that sentient status, then that's going to put us a step in the right direction.
Yeah. So it almost is like, that's how you have to word it, is that we're separating them from being cattle instead of making it sound like we want them to be the same as a child. It feels like that would be something people would be more open to.
Well, and the other thing is what Scott was saying about his veterinarian having so many infractions or whatever, and still being able to practice. I know there's this monetary amount that people might be suing for, whether it's what they feel about the value of their pet, or maybe what cost they incurred to fix the problem. But there's also this issue of a person who repeatedly does things that are causing harm, and whether or not we're going to allow them to continue causing harm, and that I think is probably an area that we don't want to neglect.
It's hard. It's not an easy cut and dry.
You want everybody to do the right thing,
yeah,
right?
Right. If everybody would just do the right thing, then life would be so much easier. So Merv brings up a good question. And maybe, I don't know if every state is like this, but are emotional support dogs or service animals, are they also property, even though they are doing a job and a service for a person, or have we been able to separate them?
So they're considered a working dog. So they're still property, just like a dog that herds cattle is a working dog. However, that dog typically has a higher value because of its specialized training to herd cattle or sheep or whatever. So even so if that dog, goes to the vet, gets killed by the veterinarian, like that value because of the training is higher. So it's the same sort of thing with an emotional support animal or a service animal. I would generally say emotional support animals are not valued as highly as service animals because their training isn't as specialized as a service animal.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so they're still all property, but just the level of training and investment. I mean, I've met people with service animals, they put $100,000 into these service animals, or there's organizations that put that much. So the dog is worth $100,000, but it's like $100,000 car instead of a $10,000 car.
So the money put into the training becomes the value of the dog.
Yes. And I've met people that have, they spend a lot of training on their dogs, and their dogs can, like stop on a dime and balance a ball on the end of its nose. But because it doesn't really serve a functional purpose, that sometimes that training will get ignored. So if the dog is not a working dog, if the training is just for entertainment value or for ease of your life or whatever reason, if the dog is still just a companion animal or a pet, then sometimes that training doesn't always get valued properly, I think.
Yeah. So if they're smelling out your seizures versus rolling over and playing dead, dang, I spent a lot of time teaching Ansel that trick. And treats were expensive. I mean, a lot of treats to get that dog to do that. But that's, that's still a direction, at least we're going, right? To see that is a value. I know that there was a case with Hill's dog food company where a lot of dogs died because they had doubled the vitamin D. And the lead in that lawsuit, her dog was a service dog. She actually suffered from seizures, and her dog was able to alert her. So she became the lead in that because he was a step a little bit above. I hate to say that. It sounds so horrible to say that he was more important to her than Ansel is to me. But the people who were putting that together, the lawyers that put that together, recognized that's who they needed to be. And they were successful in their fight. And Hills actually rolled over and paid out. Not as much as I think they should have, but they paid out. But these are all little steps, right? They seem like they're little steps. And I know that for the attorneys, a lot of times you're going into court and you're fighting for what seems like it's not very much. There's not very much money, but each one of those, do you think is getting us there? Eventually it has to, right?
Yeah, I think that litigation is huge in terms. Litigation, going into lawsuits, is the only way that you'll change the law through the legal system. Besides lobbying, getting your senator, your city councilman, whatever, woman, to get them to change the law themselves, fastest way. I tell everybody, advocate for something different with your representative. Otherwise, you're in the legal system, which is a very slow mechanism. But yeah, it's the only way that it will change the law, is actually litigating it all the way to a verdict.
Okay. And the only way we're going to get that is we've got to get more people on this. We've got to get this documentary made, guys. If you're listening to this, I can't stress it enough. You think that it's not, Jerry and Scott and I are not sitting here going, it'd be fun to make a documentary. We should do that. No, this is about getting, the lobbyists on board, for them to see the documentary, for them to, feel the pain and the emotion that, this puts on everybody, not just, but in a weird way, I think this does a really good service for veterinarians, right? Like if veterinarians are brought up to a different standard, I think it's a good thing for the veterinarian world. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, you want your colleagues to.
Oh, I would think that I can't imagine there's a veterinarian who is, and let's not kid ourselves. There are mistakes that are made. There are things that happen, and there are a lot of things that can happen in a veterinarian's office that are really not in the veterinarian's control at the time. Whether it's a technician that does something that they weren't supposed to do.
Right.
But I think that almost every knowledgeable and conscientious veterinarian would love for all veterinarians to be that way. We don't want there to be bad representatives of our occupation. And, you know, it's just, I guess I would say when there is a mistake, I think a lot of the veterinarians with integrity are going to confront that, have a conversation, try to work something out, admit there was a mistake and try to figure out a solution for it. For people that choose not to go that route, then this changing of the laws may be the only way to try to eliminate that from our occupation. I mean,
I think we've got to get the laws changed, and we've got to make it so that veterinarians are thinking more in that terms. I've said this before. I worked for a veterinarian one time who kind of joked about, well, I mean, what are they going to get? $50? You know, it wasn't, it was a culture that he created. He created that culture, not just for his facility, but the vet techs that might go on to another place. And it just created this environment where people kind of were like, what are they going to do? And so it's not about money. It's about changing the culture that kind of gets created around that it's not important.
And, you know, back again, 25 years ago, when I was in vet school, I will tell you, I took a lot of hits from my classmates, my instructors, for really wanting to nurture almost every little living thing around me. And so when I was put into the barn, the food animal barn, for my rotation there, I got made fun of a lot because I walked in my first day and I said, I want everything that needs to be bottle fed. You know, just give me all the babies. That's what I want. And, you know, but I did take a lot of hits because of the culture that was in there, and pretty, I think, I have to think over the last 25 years that things have changed a little bit, that things have, that now my way of doing things, when I wanted to give, I would stay an hour later than every other student to make sure that everybody had a nice warm blanket for the night, you know, or that, you know, check anybody's water, because people didn't think of that. And I just wanted to make sure it was done. But I think that I would like to believe that that's changed a little bit. I would like to believe that that's a little bit a part of the program now when they train these veterinarians to say, you know, make sure, even if it's because you might get sued, do this. Hopefully it'd be because it's in their heart, and it should be in their heart to do it. But if not, then maybe
I think it is in every veterinarian's heart in the beginning.
No.
And no, damn. Why do you have to rob me of my hope?
It's not. People go to vet school for a lot of different reasons, and there are people in vet school that I had somebody
that's heartbreaking.
That honestly wanted to go to vet school to be a policeman, for veterinarians. She didn't want to practice at all. She didn't want to touch an animal. She wanted to be a policeman for animals. So her goal was to work for the state and the regulatory part of this. That was what she wanted to do. So and not, you know, I actually, I don't even think she finished vet school. I don't think she got through it. But what I'm saying is that people don't always have that love for the animal. They are coming from a family business where it's, you know, they're taking care of a herd of something, and it's not, and it's really more about the value on the hoof.
So maybe what we need is a questionnaire that we give our vets before they see our animals. Why did you go to vet school? Number one. You know, so I'm going to read a question that came across over our Facebook, and it's a little, I'm trying to kind of go through it a little bit. She says that she read a WebMD stating what should not take me. Can you read it?
I gotta get glasses.
Okay. she says, I think what she's trying to say is there's certain drugs that include that humans and animals with white blood cell count and kidney disease or pancreatitis shouldn't take. Her pet's white blood cell count and platelet count were low at her visit to the vet on January 8th, 2019, and her amylase levels were high at the same visit, which indicates pancreatitis. Knowing that, is it Shayna's amylase levels were elevated, the vet put her on metronidazole, which also increases the amylase levels, according to the article. Her question is, don't they teach this in veterinarian school? So that's to you.
Do they teach the contraindications of medications? Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, they do teach it. And then her question is, it's not even approved by the FDA for animal use. Every vet should know this, correct? Would a veterinarian know that it's not approved by the FDA?
There are medications that are frequently used off-label use, where, and it's like that in human medicine as well, where something is used, but the actual label from the manufacturer doesn't recommend it, or well, I don't want to say they don't recommend it, or they haven't put it as a use for that drug. But there are papers, that are all written about different things that would maybe caution, hey, this probably shouldn't be used in a pet or we found that 80% would react a certain way if it was used.
So would it be against a veterinarian's standard care to use something that isn't approved by the FDA? They can't do that?
Yes.
So there's not anything that dictates that you can't, that it has to be all FDA approved
when
medicine.
you're using off-label medications, and to be honest, a lot of our chemotherapy drugs are used off-labal. They're not labeled.
When you say off-label, are you saying
they're not labeled from the manufacturer for use in dogs or cats, or they're used for use in people? And so we extrapolate that
and use it for pets,
right?
And
so almost all the chemotherapy drugs at the time when I came out of vet school were off-label.
Okay, but they were used for humans, and then they started using them for animals. So Kristina, is that something that you would look at and be able to, I mean, if Dr. Haddad is saying that legally her license allows her to do that, would that be a legal reason to go after for veterinary malpractice?
This is where I defer to the veterinarians. I'm not a veterinarian myself, so it's like I can look at records. I've just read enough records now that I can say that this doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't look right, but I can only say it's probable that there's veterinary malpractice here. I need a veterinarian to look at, which is why Joey's legacy is invaluable for me personally, and I would imagine any other attorney on the team, because getting that letter from a veterinarian who is licensed, certified, educated as a veterinarian to look through the records and say, yeah, this deviates from the standard of care. Because all I can say, because under the rules of civil procedure in Colorado and in most states require you to have what's called a certificate of merit. Sometimes it's called something else in different states, but basically it's a certificate that says, yes, there is malpractice here. It's required in human malpractice cases as well. It's required in legal malpractice cases. So if somebody says that I didn't do what I was supposed to as an attorney, they have to get another attorney to say, yeah, Kristina deviated from the standard of care as an attorney in order to sue me. So, I mean, this is just required in malpractice cases as far as I'm aware. So yeah, I mean, I can never really say 100% that something was or was malpractice. I can just say, yes, this looks like malpractice to me. Now we need to get a veterinarian to double check.
To get involved.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're up on our 1 hour. So just really quickly, Jerry, can you just tell us a little bit? Oh gosh, you guys, there's a couple questions coming in. We're probably going to have to wait. I know sometimes people come in late and then I can't get to them, but I promised my veterinarians and our attorneys we wouldn't keep them too much longer. But Jerry, can you tell us really quickly a little bit about where the documentary is right now? Can you help us a little bit to understand like how far along that's coming and what's the next step?
Yeah, let me give you a little insight to it. First of all, I want to comment on something Kristina said earlier. Until the courts change and until the veterinarian boards change, from the research I've done, it's going to be a long battle. When a court considers an animal to be a lawnmower, lawnmowers don't have DNA. Birdhouses don't have DNA. You don't cuddle with your lawnmower, you cuddle with your animal. And until the courts realize that these are not really personal property, and if they want to claim it as personal property, then let it be a house. Let the settlement be worth $500,000 like it is for humans.
Exactly. Let it be a house.
But the other thing I want to mention is, if it wasn't for Scott, none of us would be on this podcast right now. And I'm going to give a lot of praise to him for doing what he's doing. He's getting exposure for this cause. And one of the ways he did it is he got in touch with me about writing a book. A book is great exposure, especially as many as we're selling. However, it's not near the exposure that a documentary can be. And I've met a documentarian. I'm going down to visit him at the end of June. And he has 9 Emmys. He's world renowned. He's had stuff on History Channel, PBS, you name it, Animal Planet. And until we can get a documentary made that can go on these types of shows like 60 Minutes and put pressure on the courts and the veterinarians, and especially the veterinarian boards, nothing's going to happen. We have a great opportunity here to get a 60-minute documentary. I checked prices on having it produced before I ever met John Biffar. His last name is Biffar. First name is John. I would encourage anybody to go to YouTube or Yahoo or Google search and put his name in, and you'll be amazed at some of the things that he's done. And he's very willing. As a matter of fact, he's invited Scott and I to stay at his home in Fort Myers at the end of this month. But he is excellent. He gave us a price much less. Well, the prices that I had seen for a 1-hour documentary were about $250,000 to $500,000. He gave us a price of $100,000, which of course I don't have, and neither does Joey's Legacy. But we're getting there. We're 23% of the way there. We got $23,000. There's people setting up GoFundMe's, doing all kinds of stuff. They're getting people on Facebook to donate money for their birthday charity, which goes to Joey's Legacy. And we're going to get there, but only we can make it happen. You can make it happen. You can tell all your friends about it. Everybody can donate something. If you've got a pet and you got a cell phone, you can donate $10. You can donate $10 a month. But we can drag this out for a year, or we can get it done by, Scott would like to have it done by September 30th. We got to get it done. John Biffar will make a documentary that will knock your socks off. I've seen him. Just go there and look at his stuff. He does everything from 30-second PSA ads to 6-hour documentaries on people that live in the dump in Guatemala. He's just an amazing guy. It's a blessing that I have met him, and I met him through one of Joey's members, actually. And like I said, he's become very intrigued and very interested. What he'll do is take this documentary to the Sundance Film Festival and other film festivals, sell it to people like Animal Planet, History Channel, 60 Minutes, whoever wants to buy it. And then we'll have the exposure that we need. I would like kudos to Scott for getting this all carried out. Bless his heart.
Definitely.
Bless Dr. Haddad's heart for taking on a cat that has no eyes. That's an amazing thing. That's a great heart. Thank you.
Oh, no, you have, the Island of Misfits Toys was not one. She had, I'm telling you, it was this never-ending island that just kept coming and more. Yeah, now one doesn't have a foot, and now this one doesn't have a leg, and this one doesn't have. Oh yeah, it was awesome. It was an awesome little place, but anyway. So Scott, I just want, Jerry's right when he says, it's sad because we wouldn't be here without the loss of Joey. So it's such a blessing that you are here and you're doing this, and you've done so much. I know it gets frustrating sometimes. You and I have spoke personally about the frustrations of wanting this to happen and happen soon, because if it doesn't happen soon, then more animals are dying needlessly and going through situations that they shouldn't necessarily be going to. So there's this frustration to get the donations, to get the documentary. But I want to tell you that you have made huge strides, even though I know you feel sometimes you're spinning your wheels, and we're getting there, and we're going to get there slowly. And, I know a lot of times when we're asking for donations, people think $5 doesn't matter, but it does matter. It absolutely matters, because it encourages other people to do it. But is there anything you want to say, Scott? I know we always kind of round these up kind of with some last words from you.
Sure.
And then.
Sure. For the new people here that have never been part of one of these roundtables, the good news throughout all of this is that consistently over the last 4 years that Joey's Legacy has been in existence, new members answer questions before they're approved. And I can tell you consistently over time, about 85% of the people that joined Joey's Legacy, and we're up to about 2,400 people right now, 85% of them have stated that they have never had a problem with a veterinarian.
I love their vet.
The other 15 or so percent cite issues such as feed disputes, problems with controversial drugs, topical products, flea collar issues, and of course, allegations of veterinary negligence or malpractice. So that's the good news throughout this whole thing. The other thing I want to make mention of is regarding the issue of enacting laws in states. Keep in mind that most states, and I'll cite Florida because I'm intimately familiar with that system, quote unquote. There is in place state sentencing guidelines for practitioners that violate the Veterinary Practice Act more than once. So the first time it's the usual hand slap, $1,000 fine, don't do it again. The second violation allows for a suspension of up to 1 year of the practitioner's license. Now go back to 2003 and review all of the minutes of the quarterly meetings of the Florida Board of Veterinary Medicine. You can count on one hand how many licenses have been suspended since 2003. So we're talking about 18 years. It's the standard $1,000 fine, 1 year probation, maybe some continuing education like that. So there are laws in place that or policies in place that provide for progressive discipline. The problem is, if the practitioner makes a conscious decision to be deceptive about what happened in the exam room before they go out and talk to the pet parent, that's a flaw in their character, okay? But the real inherent problem are the vet boards, because they have the power to discipline firmly and fairly. They refuse to do it under most conditions. And that's what we have to deal with when we lose a family member that way. So that's why Jerry and I are working hard to kind of expose all of this and let people know what they're in for if they ever have the misfortune of dealing with the loss of a family member.
Thanks, Scott. Kristina, can you tell us what would you suggest in order, if someone feels like they've been through this, who do they go to file a complaint? What would your suggestion be for them to do going forward once they feel this has happened to them?
The first thing I always suggest everybody does is get records as soon as possible. In Colorado, veterinarians are not allowed to withhold records for unpaid fees or any reason. Once you ask for it, you're supposed to give it up. I imagine that's similar in other states as well. But yeah, get your records as soon as possible. That's step number one. As far as reporting, obviously you can always try to report to the veterinary board, but as Scott has pointed out, sometimes it's not the best option. I mean, I would say become a member of Joey's Legacy, contact Joey's Legacy, get those records to one of their veterinarians as soon as possible, because as Scott said, they have a network of in all 50 states, I believe all 50 states now,
Yes.
Scott, right? Yeah. So all 50 states. So there's an attorney in your state who can help you. There's a veterinarian who can help you. So contact Joey's Legacy as soon as you get those records.
Thank you so much for doing that. Tara, Dr. Haddad, what do we do? What can we do to protect? Top 2 things they can do to protect their animals from veterinary malpractice.
That a pet parent can do?
Yep.
I am struggling because I'm thinking when you hand that little thing over to us, you have no control over what we do to them, and so I would say, again, with COVID, I don't know, have a good conversation with the person and get to know them. I was so fortunate to have, but when I was taking care of these pets with cancer, I got to see these people every week. I mean, a lot of them every week, at least every month. And having that relationship is so important, I think.
Yeah.
It definitely doesn't change the fact that a mistake can be made or a cover-up can be done, but at least if you have a relationship and you trust each other, then so there may be some, if you get some feelings one way or another that something's not right, or that you hear about things happening at a certain veterinary hospital. I mean, I think the main thing is keep your pet safe as you can, but you have to trust the person you hand them over to when they need veterinary care.
But I think you're so right though about that relationship, because I mean, I just have a boarding facility and a daycare and a grooming facility, but people get mad about things, little things, and then they just keep going from place to place to place to place. And when you do that in a veterinary care, you're increasing the risks of problems because you've broken the line of communications and you have to keep breaking it. So I know there's cases where you just can't continue to go to that vet. I just had a talk the other day about being careful not to be too loyal to your vet, because you can.
Well, that's another thing too, is if you're dealing with a serious issue that may need either something pretty significant to happen, a surgery or a lot of tests to be done to figure out what's going on, I always welcome second opinions. I always told my clients, you know what, if there's hesitation at all, if this is going to require us to really work as a team, if you're having hesitation, let's get some other opinions. Let's do whatever we have to do to make everybody feel comfortable with the team that we're going to have.
Yeah.
So I would say getting second opinions. Don't be afraid to do that. There should not be a veterinarian that would be angry about you wanting to do that.
But I hear that a lot from people. Well, I don't want to make
or it's
my
expensive to get a good.
It's got to be done.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to get these second and third opinions. I think that, having that communication with a vet that's willing to let you do that is probably, the communication is number one. I agree with you.
It's important. It's important. It's not the only thing, but it's one important thing.
Yeah. So don't get mad at your veterinarian because they didn't answer the phone on Tuesday and now you're going to go to another vet, because you can have some control, and that control is being willing to talk without being right. I mean, sometimes people just attack their veterinarian and accuse them of things, and you want to have that line of communication open. I know there was a couple more questions. We'll be posting the next roundtable that we're going to be doing. We're going to be bringing on. I can't thank you guys enough for all of you spending your time. Nobody's getting paid to do this. This is just out of our love for animals that we sit here before you asking you guys to please help us help your animals. And sometimes Scott and I talk about this a lot. People think it's just veterinary malpractice, but there's abuse and neglect in every part of the pet industry. And so changing the laws as far as making them not property is our first step. It needs to happen. But before I let you guys go, I know we talked a lot about this book, and we talk a lot about, you know, the loss of life that has happened. And we talk about Joey, who was a dachshund, which I have a special place in my heart for dachshunds because I used to breed them many years ago. But I just wanted to read a quick little line that was written in this book. So this book is a lot of information in here, but it's also a collection of stories of animals that have lost their lives, not just Joey. So it's sad to me that Jerry's working on the second book, and there could be a third and a fourth and a fifth and a ninth and a 10th and a 100th book of stories. But this one in particular was written by Christy Lynn, and she says, Otis was a once in a lifetime dog. He was not just any ordinary pug. He was a super pug. Otis was so in love with life. He was the best little man ever. He loved his mommy, daddy, 2 younger brothers. So I just, you know, it brings tears to my eyes when I hear how many people are losing their animals over things that it doesn't have to happen. So I encourage you all to continue to be a part of Joey's legacy and help us make a difference, and just reach out to some of the vets. Dr. Haddad, thank you guys. Like this can't happen. It can't happen without you, Jerry. It can't happen without you, Scott, Kristina, Dr. Haddad. Thank you guys so much. So have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
nice
you,
to meet
Scott.
you.
Thank you,
Hey,
Sherry.
Kristina, take care.
Take care.
All right.